A millionaire finds his housekeeper asleep in a hospital with her baby. What he does next will touch your heart. Alexander shoved the door to room 304 open so hard the wood slammed against the wall, making a loud bang that echoed down the hallway of the public hospital in downtown New York. He was clutching a crumpled termination letter in his right fist, his knuckles white from squeezing it so tight. For the past 3 weeks, he'd noticed how small trinkets were disappearing from the mansion, how food was missing from the pantry, and worst of all, how Mia, his trusted housekeeper, kept vanishing for hours in the middle of her shift without any explanation. Alexander, a man who had built his real estate empire on a foundation of distrust and absolute control, did not tolerate betrayal. He'd followed Mia's taxi, expecting to catch her at some cheap motel with a lover, spending his money, or maybe at a flea market selling his late wife's silverware. He was ready to scream, to humiliate her, to call the police and see her in handcuffs. But the scream died in his throat. What he saw froze him right there on the worn linoleum floor. There were no lovers, no stolen jewelry scattered on the bed. There was just a cold atmosphere, heavy with the smell of cheap antiseptic and the rhythmic, almost hypnotic beeping of a life support machine. Beep, beep, beep. There was Mia. She wasn't out celebrating. She was slumped over in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her head resting on the edge of a metal hospital bed. What hit Alexander like a sledgehammer to the chest wasn't seeing her sleeping, but seeing what she was wearing. She was still in her maid's uniform, the sky blue dress with the crisp white trim, and the apron still tied around her waist. But the detail that made Alexander's stomach turn was her hands. Mia was still wearing the yellow rubber gloves, the same ones she'd used to scrub the mansion's marble floors just an hour ago. They were stained with bleach and dust, and they were resting with heartbreaking gentleness on the tiny hand of a baby, barely visible amidst the white hospital sheets. The baby was tiny, almost transparent, and connected to a tangle of tubes and wires that looked way too big for his fragile little body. A breathing mask covered half his face. Alexander felt the room's air conditioning turn the sweat on his forehead to ice. He took a step forward, his Italian designer shoes making a thud that sounded like a gunshot in that sacred silence. His businessman's mind tried to process the data, but his father's heart, a heart he thought he'd buried with his wife years ago, started beating with painful intensity. Mia stirred in her sleep. A moan of pure exhaustion escaped her lips. With an instinctive movement, not fully waking up, she tucked the blanket around the baby's chest with her gloved hands, as if she was afraid the cold of the world might touch him. "Please, no," she murmured in her sleep, her voice cracking with an anguish Alexander had never heard back at the mansion. Alexander stepped closer, hypnotized. He looked at the heart monitor. The numbers were flashing red, spiking and dropping dangerously. That little boy was fighting for every single second of his life. Alexander looked down at the termination letter in his hand. Suddenly, that piece of paper seemed ridiculous, obscene. He had come here to destroy the life of a woman who was clearly already living in hell. The baby, identified as Ethan on the medical chart at the foot of the bed, opened his eyes for a split second. They were big, dark, soulful eyes that looked up at Alexander with an intensity no newborn should ever possess. He didn't cry. He didn't have the strength to cry. He just stared at him. And in that gaze, Alexander felt a chill run right down his spine. There was something in those eyes, something familiar, something that reminded him of a past he found painful to recall. Alexander's anger turned into a suffocating confusion. Why had Mia never told him she had a son? Why did she work double shifts, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, when she had a dying child in a charity ward? He paid her minimum wage, the legal requirement, and not a penny more. He'd always thought that was enough for a young single girl. Now, looking at the tubes, the monitors, and the deathly pallor of Ethan, Alexander finally understood the reason for the missing jewelry. It wasn't theft out of greed, it was theft out of desperation. Suddenly, the rhythm of the monitor changed, speeding up. Beep, 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 beep. Mia woke with a start, as if an electric shock had surged through her. She sat up so fast the plastic chair screeched against the floor. Her eyes, bloodshot and ringed with deep purple circles, took a second to focus. First, she checked the baby, glancing at the monitor with the panic of a mother expecting the worst. Then, she sensed a strange presence in the room. She turned her head slowly, and when she saw Alexander's imposing figure standing at the foot of the bed in his dark gray suit, wearing an unreadable expression, the color drained from her face. She clapped her gloved hands over her mouth to stifle a scream, and pure terror flooded her eyes. It wasn't fear of a man. It was the fear of someone who knows they are about to lose the only thing keeping her son alive. Her job. Subscribe now to find out why this millionaire's rage will turn into the only hope for this baby, and the dark secret that connects their lives. Mr. Alexander, Mia's voice came out like a croak, a strangled plea. She shot to her feet, placing herself between the millionaire and the bed, like a wounded lioness protecting her cub. Even though her legs were shaking so hard it looked like she might collapse at any second. Instinctively, she hid her hands, still wearing the yellow rubber gloves, behind her back, as if trying to hide the evidence of her double life, the proof of her poverty and struggle. I can explain, sir. Please, don't shout in here. You'll wake him up, she whispered, tears starting to cut clean paths through the grime and exhaustion on her cheeks. I'm heading back to the house right now. I just came. I only came to bring him his medicine. Please don't fire me. I beg you on everything that's holy. I'll work double shifts tomorrow. I'll clean the basement, the attic, whatever you say. Just please don't take away my job. Alexander stood motionless, watching her. The termination letter was still in his hand, but his grip loosened. The sight of this woman, so small and fragile in front of him, shaking with dread, not for herself but for that child that lay behind her, hit his conscience with the force of a freight train. Mia, he said, his voice sounding deeper and raspier than usual. He didn't scream. He couldn't. The rage had faded, leaving a cold void filled with questions. Take off those gloves. She blinked, confused, waiting for insults, waiting for the accusation of theft. I said, take those damn gloves off, Alexander repeated, stepping forward. It wasn't a boss's order. It was a human necessity. He couldn't stand seeing that yellow rubber, a symbol of servitude, touching the skin of a child fighting against death. Mia obeyed clumsily, tearing the gloves off with trembling hands and letting them drop to the floor. Her real hands were red, cracked by the cleaning chemicals, with short, neglected nails. Is he yours? Alexander asked, motioning with his chin toward the bed where Ethan was struggling to breathe. Mia lowered her head, defeated. She knew the mansion's rules were strict, no family burdens, total availability. She had lied in her interview. She'd hidden her pregnancy with tight girdles until the 7th month, then claimed she was just fat until she gave birth in secret over a weekend. Yes, sir, she whispered. He's my son. His name is Ethan. And why the hell are you here and not taking care of him? Alexander couldn't help letting a tone of reproach seep into his voice. Because if I don't work, he doesn't get medicine. Mia looked up, and for the first time, there was a flash of defiance in her damp eyes. Medicaid doesn't cover the experimental treatment he needs. Every hour I spend cleaning your mansion pays for 1 more hour of oxygen for him. The jewelry... She paused, swallowing hard, knowing she was confessing to a crime. Sir, I took a brooch last week and an old watch from the drawer. I sold everything. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Deduct it from my salary for the rest of my life, but please don't report me. He needs me here, not in jail. The confession hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Alexander looked at the gold watch on his own wrist. It was worth more than all the medical equipment in that room. The disparity made him nauseous. What's wrong with him? Alexander asked, ignoring the confession of theft. Congenital heart failure, Mia replied, her voice breaking. His heart is too big for his chest, but too weak to beat. The doctors say he needs an operation, a surgery that costs more than I'll make in 10 lifetimes. We're just buying time, waiting for a miracle or the end. At that moment, the machine started beeping louder. A sharp, constant alarm filled the room. Mia spun toward the bed, panic twisting her face. Ethan! She screamed, forgetting Alexander, forgetting her job, forgetting everything. She threw herself over the baby, whose little hands were flailing weakly in the air. Help! Doctor, someone help me! Alexander watched as the baby's tiny body arched, searching for air his lungs couldn't process. The child's face began turning a terrifying grayish blue. Without thinking, Alexander ran to the door, sticking his head out into the hallway. We need a doctor here, now! He roared with that commanding voice he used in boardrooms to close million-dollar deals, but this time charged with a desperate urgency. A nurse and a young doctor rushed in, shoving Alexander aside. He stood pressed against the wall, feeling useless for the first time in decades. He watched them work on the tiny body, injecting meds, adjusting the oxygen, moving with frantic precision. Mia was huddled in the opposite corner, biting her fist to keep from screaming, her eyes locked on her son. Alexander glanced at her, then at the boy amidst the chaos. With the baby's shirt open so the doctor could place the stethoscope, something caught the light on little Ethan's chest. Hanging from a cheap string chain around the baby's neck was a small, tarnished silver medal. Alexander's world stopped dead. The beeping alarms, the doctors shouting, Mia's crying. It all faded away. He knew that medal. It had a very specific inscription on the back. It was a St. Christopher medal, the patron saint of travelers. But it wasn't just any medal. It had a notch on the top edge, carved with a knife. Alexander took a shaky step toward the bed, ignoring the nurse telling him to get out. His eyes were glued to that little piece of silver against the dying baby's skin. He'd given that medal to his son, Robert, on his graduation day from Harvard. 3 years before Robert died in that stupid car crash, Robert never took it off. He was buried without it, because they never found it at the crash site. Where did you get that? Alexander's voice was a terrifying whisper, sharp enough to cut steel. The doctor managed to stabilize the baby. The beeping went back to a steady rhythm, even if it was fast. Mia collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief. Alexander didn't wait. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbed Mia by the shoulders, and yanked her up with a force that scared her more than the baby's crisis. I asked you a question, Alexander screamed, shaking her, his eyes bloodshot and crazed. That medal belonged to my son, Robert. Did you steal that too? Did you strip it off a corpse? Speak! Mia shook her head frantically, terror choking her words. No, I didn't steal it, she sobbed. He gave it to me. He gave it to me the night we said goodbye. What the hell are you talking about? Robert died 2 years ago. You've only been working for me for 6 months. You're lying. I'm not lying, Mia screamed, finding strength in her desperation. I knew Robert. Before, I worked for you. We met at the public library in Brooklyn. He didn't tell me he was rich. I didn't know who you were until I saw your picture in the living room, on the day of my interview. Alexander let go of her like she was on fire. He stumbled back, looking between Mia and baby Ethan. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a picture his mind refused to accept. What are you saying? Alexander asked, his voice shaking as he pointed at the baby. "That boy." Mia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, straightening up with sudden dignity. "Ethan isn't just my son." "Mr. Alexander," she said, looking the millionaire right in the eyes for the first time, "Ethan is all that's left of Robert." The silence that followed her confession was louder than the medical alarms. Alexander felt like the ground beneath him had turned into quicksand. "Ethan is all that's left of Robert." The words echoed inside his skull, crashing against the walls of his skepticism and unresolved grief. Slowly, like someone walking up to a bomb about to go off, Alexander reached out toward the baby's chest. His fingers, used to signing million-dollar contracts and holding crystal goblets, were visibly trembling. He grazed Ethan's feverish skin before curling his fingers around the silver metal. It was warm from the boy's body heat. He tugged on it gently to see the back. There was the inscription, "To my son, my pride, A.H., and his graduation date. Alexander dropped the metal like it was burning his skin and backed away, slamming his back against the cold wall. His breathing turned ragged, erratic. "That's impossible!" he bellowed, his voice thick with a toxic mix of hope and fury. "The police gave me his personal effects in a plastic bag." The watch was smashed, the wallet was burnt to a crisp, but the metal wasn't there. They said it got lost in the impact or that someone stole it in the chaos of the crash. He turned on Mia with a look that could have cut glass. "You!" He pointed an accusing finger at her. "You were there, weren't you? You were one of the onlookers who got close to the wreck. You saw my son dying on the asphalt and you stole this off his neck. Tell me the truth. How dare you use the memory of my dead son to save your own skin?" Mia shook her head, tears streaming freely down her face, mixing with the sweat of pure fear. "No, sir. Oh my God, no!" she cried out, taking a step toward him, though her posture remained submissive. "Robert gave it to me 2 days before the accident. We were at Central Park, near the lake where he liked to go to escape from the pressure of your company." That comment hit Alexander like a slap in the face. Robert hated the company. He hated the expectations of his father. He hated being the heir. "He put it around my neck," Mia continued, speaking fast, desperate to be believed. "He told me my father gave me this when he thought I was who he wanted me to be. But you love me for who I really am." "He gave it to me as a promise, sir. A promise that he would talk to you, that we would run away together. He didn't want to be a millionaire, Mr. Alexander. He wanted to be free, and that night he was going to tell you. He was going to give up everything for us, for me and for the baby that was already on the way, even though he didn't know for sure yet." Alexander felt a sharp pain in his chest, an old, familiar ache. The night of the accident, Robert had come to the mansion in the Hamptons. They had argued. Alexander had screamed at him that he was an ingrate, a weakling. Robert had stormed out, revving his sports car in the rain, and he never came back. "You're lying," Alexander whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was trying to convince himself, trying to keep his armor of cynicism intact. "You're an opportunist, a maid who saw a chance. I bet you slept with him. Yeah, maybe you were a one-night stand, but a son? His son?" He approached the crib again and looked down at the baby. Ethan was sleeping now, exhausted from the earlier crisis. Alexander searched desperately for some feature, some sign, the shape of the nose, the arch of the eyebrows, but babies look so generic, they change so much. However, there was something about the chin, that little cleft. Robert had it. Alexander had it. "If this boy is my grandson," Alexander said, lowering his voice to a dangerously calm tone, "then I am a monster, because I have had my own flesh and blood living in a maid's room, eating leftovers. while I slept in silk sheets just 2 rooms away. Mia sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I didn't want anything from you, sir. I just wanted to take care of Ethan, but his heart. She looked at the baby with anguish. When he was born, I knew he was sick. I spent everything I had. I sold everything Robert gave me, except the medal. I couldn't sell that one. It's his protection. It's his father watching over him. Alexander looked at the medal again. Saint Christopher, the patron saint of safe travels. What irony. Why didn't you tell me? Alexander asked with sudden harshness. If he was his son, you had every right to claim support. You could have sued me. You could have demanded a paternity test months ago. Why stay silent? Why clean my toilets instead of demanding your place? Mia looked up, and in her brown eyes, Alexander saw a brutal honesty that disarmed him. Because Robert told me you were a hard man, sir. That if you found out that nobody like me was pregnant with your heir, you would take the baby away from me, that you'd use your lawyers and your money to say I was unfit, that I was poor, that I was ignorant. Mia straightened up, drawing strength from her maternal instinct. I preferred being your maid and having my son with me than being your enemy and losing him forever. Alexander stood speechless. The truth of those words stung. She was right. If she had come 6 months ago, pregnant and single, he would have destroyed her in court. He would have taken the child away to raise him with dignity, and he would have banished her. She knew him better than he knew himself, through the eyes of a dead son. Suddenly, the door opened again. This time it wasn't an emergency entrance, but the cold, calculated entry of administrative reality. The chief of surgery, a gray-haired man with a face of chronic exhaustion and a clipboard in his hand, walked into the room. He looked at Mia with pity, a pity that had clearly already run dry. And then he looked at Alexander with surprise, recognizing the expensive suit and the posture of power, even if he didn't know who he was. Ms. Mia, the doctor said, momentarily ignoring Alexander. We managed to stabilize Ethan, but this was just a warning. His mitral valve is collapsing. The medication isn't working anymore. We need to operate now, this very night. Mia gripped the bars of the crib. Doctor, please, do whatever you have to do. Save him. The doctor sighed and shook his head. We've already talked about this. The hospital cannot authorize a surgery of this complexity and cost without upfront payment or insurance to cover it. The supplies, the pediatric cardiac surgery team, the stay in the ICU. We are talking about a sum that exceeds the budget for charity cases for the entire month. The doctor paused cruelly. We need $80,000 to start, and we need it within the next hour to prep the operating room. Otherwise, we can only offer palliative care, so that he doesn't suffer when the time comes. Mia let out a stifled scream and collapsed to the floor, hugging the doctor's legs. No, don't tell me that. I'll pay you. I'll work my whole life. I'll sign anything. Please, don't let him die. The doctor tried to lift her up, looking uncomfortable. I'm so sorry, ma'am. My hands are tied by administration. No payment, no equipment. Alexander watched the scene unfold. $80,000. That was what he spent on a charity gala just to impress his partners. It was the cost of maintaining his yacht for a couple of months. For this woman, it was an astronomical figure. Impossible. A death sentence. He looked at baby Ethan. The boy's chest rose and fell with titanic effort. Every breath was a battle. If that child was his grandson, he carried Harrington blood. And a Harrington didn't die for lack of money in a dingy public hospital. But the doubt was still there, gnawing at his mind like a parasite. What if it was a master scam? What if she had planned all this? Time was running out. The sound of Mia's sobs filled the room, a raw animal sound that spoke of imminent loss. The doctor began to pull his leg from the woman's grip, getting ready to leave and sign the "Do Not Resuscitate" order. The bureaucracy of death was in motion. "Wait." Alexander's voice cut through the air, resonating with an authority that made the doctor stop dead in his tracks and spin around. Alexander walked slowly toward the center of the room. He didn't look at Mia, who was still on the floor. He stared hard at the doctor, reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, and pulled out a black leather wallet. From it, he extracted a black titanium credit card, the kind of card that has no limits and opens doors that remain closed to 99% of humanity. 80,000? Alexander asked, with a tone as casual as if he were asking for the time. The doctor blinked, looking at the card and then at the man holding it. His attitude changed instantly. The fatigue disappeared, replaced by a respectful alertness. "Yes, sir. That approximately covers the surgery, the equipment, and the first week of recovery in intensive care. But the billing department is on the ground floor, and I am not going down to any—" "Ground floor," Alexander interrupted, holding out the card between two fingers. "You are going to call whoever you have to call, bring the card reader here, or take the details right now. I want that operating room prepped in 10 minutes. I want the best surgeon you have in this building scrubbing in now. And if you don't have one, I'll call my private team to fly in by helicopter. Do you understand me?" The doctor swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. He took the card with trembling hands. "Of course, sir, immediately. Dr. Reynolds is the best pediatric cardiologist in the state. He's on call. I'll notify him right now." The doctor ran out of the room, the black card in his hand like a sacred pass. Mia, who had stopped crying out of shock, stared at Alexander from the floor with wide eyes. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Her evil boss, the man who had followed her to fire her and humiliate her, had just bought her son's life with a flick of his wrist. Slowly, she stood up, brushing off her dress with trembling hands. "Mr. Alexander," she began, her voice a thread of gratitude. Thank you. I swear I will pay you back every single cent. I'll work for free for the rest of my life. I'll be your slave if I have to. You've saved your—" Alexander raised a hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. His face showed no pity, no warmth. It was hardened, cold as ice. He turned toward her and cornered her against the wall, invading her personal space until she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic scent of the hospital. "Make no mistake, Mia," he said in a low, menacing voice. "I didn't do this for you, and I don't want your gratitude or your slavery." He leaned in closer, his gray eyes piercing right through her. "I paid because there is a chance, however tiny, that this boy carries my last name. And if that's the case, I won't let him die like a beggar. But listen to me closely." Alexander paused, letting the tension build. "While they operate on the boy, you and I are going to do something else. Along with the payment for the surgery, I've ordered an emergency DNA test. They'll take samples from Ethan in the operating room, and you will give me a sample right now. My private lab will process the results in less than 6 hours." Mia nodded without hesitation. "Do it, sir. I'm not afraid. He is your grandson." "I hope so," Alexander replied, and his voice turned even darker. "Because here's the situation, Mia. I just spent a fortune on that child. If the result says he is my grandson, you'll have my full support. I'll give you a house, education for him, and you two will never want for anything. He will be a Harrington." Alexander moved an inch closer, his gaze becoming terrifying. "But if that paper says he isn't my blood, if I find out you've played with my dead son's memory to get money out of me, I swear on Robert's grave that I won't just fire you, I will destroy you. I will. Throw you in jail for fraud and scamming, and I'll make sure you never see the light of day again." That money I just paid will be the debt that chains you to a cell for the rest of your days. Understood? Mia held his gaze. Despite the fear, despite the threat, there was a strange calm in her. The calm of someone telling the truth. Understood, sir, she said firmly. Call your lab. Save your grandson's life. Afterward, you can do whatever you want with me. The door burst open again. A team of nurses rushed in with a transfer stretcher. We're taking Ethan to pre-op, a nurse announced. Mom, say your goodbyes, quick. Mia ran to the crib. She kissed the baby's sweaty forehead, whispering quick prayers. Fight, my love. Fight hard. Your grandfather is giving you a chance. Alexander flinched when he heard the word grandfather. He stood there, stiff, watching as they disconnected the monitors and hooked up the portables. He watched as they wheeled the small stretcher down the hallway. Mia followed behind, holding the baby's hand until they reached the swinging doors of the restricted area. When the doors closed, separating the child from the adults, Alexander and Mia were left alone in the desolate corridor. Sit down, Alexander ordered, pointing to the hard, uncomfortable waiting chairs. Nobody moves from here until I have those results. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. Smith, it's me. Get the legal team and the genetics specialist to the city hospital now and call security. I want 2 guards at the operating room door. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. Oh, and Smith, dig up everything on Mia Thompson. I want to know what she ate at kindergarten. I want to know everything. He hung up the phone and sat down across from Mia. The duel had begun. It wasn't a duel of weapons, but of truths. $80,000 and a human life were on the table. Mia sat down, clasping her hands, those red, worn-out hands, and began to pray in silence. Alexander watched her, searching for any sign of guilt, any nervous tick that screamed liar, but all he saw was a mother praying. And for the first time in years, he felt a terrifying dread. Not a fear of losing money, but a fear that she was telling the truth. Because if it was true, he had failed his son miserably while he was alive. And now, destiny was giving him a second chance in the form of a dying baby and a housekeeper he had almost destroyed. The clock on the wall struck midnight. The day was over, but the nightmare, or the miracle, was just beginning. Tell me, Alexander said suddenly, breaking the silence without even looking at Mia. Tell me what he was like with you. Mia looked up, surprised. Excuse me? Robert, Alexander said, his voice raspy. My son never talked to me. We only argued. Tell me something I don't know. While we wait for the DNA results, I need to know who the man was that gave you that medal. Mia smiled sadly, her eyes full of memories. He liked pistachio ice cream, she said softly, and he hated wearing ties. He used to say they squeezed his ideas. Alexander closed his eyes. He hated pistachio, but he always ate it when Alexander bought it for him. Go on, Alexander ordered, feeling a lump in his throat. The night was going to be long, and the truth was about to be revealed, scalpel in hand. The waiting hallway of the pediatric intensive care unit had turned into a cold, sterile interrogation room. 3 hours had passed since the operating room doors had swallowed little Ethan. 3 hours where the wall clock seemed to mock them with its slow, painful ticking. Alexander hadn't sat down once. He paced back and forth like a caged animal, his footsteps echoing with military authority against the tiles. Every time he passed Mia, he glanced at her sideways, analyzing her. She remained seated, hunched over, hands clasped in a silent prayer, not daring to look up. A man in a lab coat carrying a metal briefcase appeared from the elevator. "Mr. Harrington?" asked the technician, intimidated by the tycoon's presence. "Here," Alexander replied, stopping dead in his tracks. "You brought the kit?" "Yes, sir. Dr. Reynolds handed us the baby's blood sample from the operating room. I just need..." The technician looked at Mia uncomfortably. I need a cheek swab from the alleged mother to rule out her genetic markers and isolate the paternal line more precisely. Alexander pointed at Mia with a sharp jerk of his chin. Test her. Mia opened her mouth submissively as the technician approached. She didn't resist. She had nothing to hide but the humiliation of being treated like a lab specimen, like a criminal under suspicion, burned her up inside. The technician packed away the samples with surgical efficiency. The results will be in your encrypted email in 4 hours, Mr. Harrington. Top priority. When the technician left, the silence settled back over them, heavier than before. Alexander loosened his tie, feeling like he couldn't breathe. He needed to know more. The doubt was like acid eating away at his gut. You said he liked pistachio ice cream, Alexander said suddenly, his voice breaking the stillness. Robert hated pistachio. He always ordered dark chocolate when we went out. Mia lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were dry from crying so much, but they shined with a new kind of strength. That was with you, sir. With me. With me. It was different. Mia swallowed hard and searched her memories. He ordered pistachio because he said the green reminded him of hope. He said dark chocolate tasted like those business dinners you forced him to attend. The taste of obligation, he called it. Alexander felt a blow to his chest. The taste of obligation. That phrase sounded exactly like something Robert would say. His son had a cynical sense of humor that few people knew. What else? Alexander demanded, stepping closer to her. If you really knew him, tell me something that isn't in the society pages. Tell me something real. Mia sighed, staring into nothingness, drifting back to a time before hospitals and pain. He had a scar, she said softly. On his lower back, it looked like a crescent moon. He told me he got it climbing the fence at his boarding school when he was 12, trying to escape to visit his mother at the cemetery. Alexander froze. The blood drained from his face. No one knew that. Absolutely no one. He had cleaned that wound himself in silence, scolding Robert for his rebellion, not understanding back then that the boy just wanted to see his mother's grave on her anniversary. Alexander had forgotten that detail for years, buried under layers of business and success. That this woman, this maid in a cheap uniform, knew such an intimate secret. It was proof more solid than any DNA test. He wanted to be a painter, Mia continued, not noticing her boss's pale face. He didn't want to run the real estate company. He had a notebook, a black notebook where he drew landscapes. He drew me once while I was sleeping. He said it was the only valuable thing he'd ever created. Alexander had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Weeks after the accident, he'd found that burnt notebook among the wreckage of the car. Many pages were ash, but he'd seen sketches. Sketches of a woman with long hair sleeping. He never knew who she was. Now, she was standing right in front of him. Enough, Alexander whispered, raising a hand. He couldn't take any more. It hurt too much. Every word she spoke was confirmation that he'd lost his son long before he died. He'd lost him because he never bothered to get to know him. At that moment, the swinging doors of the operating room opened with a hydraulic hiss. Dr. Reynolds came out, rubbing his eyes, his mask hanging around his neck. His green scrubs had small, dark spots. Blood. Mia jumped to her feet, her heart beating in her throat. Alexander straightened up, instantly recovering his mask of coldness. Doctor? Mia asked with a thread of a voice. Dr. Reynolds sighed and gave them a tired but genuine smile. He's alive. Mia let out a heartbreaking sob and covered her mouth, falling to her knees on the floor again, thanking heaven. Alexander closed his eyes for a second, feeling a relief so intense it almost made him dizzy. The operation was a technical success, the doctor continued, looking at Alexander. We managed to reconstruct the valve. His heart is beating on its own now with minimal help. But what? Alexander cut in, his commanding tone returning. He is very weak. The next 48 hours are critical. Any infection, any excessive strain could be fatal. We've moved him to the neonatal ICU in an isolation incubator. You can see him through the glass, but no one can go inside. He needs absolute quiet. I want the best nurse watching him 24 hours a day, Alexander ordered, taking out his phone. And I want security at the door. No one gets near that boy without my permission. It's all arranged, Mr. Harrington. The doctor nodded. You can go see him now. Only one at a time near the glass. Alexander looked at Mia, who was still on the floor crying with gratitude. Get up, he told her, not with cruelty, but with a dry urgency. You go see him first. Mia looked at him in surprise, nodded, wiped her tears, and ran toward the ICU area. Alexander stayed behind, watching the mother run toward her son. He pulled out his cell phone. He had 5 missed calls from Smith attorneys and 3 from Victoria, his fiancée. He ignored Victoria. He called Smith. Smith, Alexander said as he walked slowly toward the ICU. Get the papers ready. Sir, the robbery lawsuit papers, the lawyer asked on the other end of the line. No, you idiot. The custody papers. Alexander lowered his voice, watching Mia's back in the distance. If the DNA confirms what I think, I'm going to claim legal guardianship of the boy. That woman has no resources. She lives in a rented room and cleans houses. She is not fit to raise a Harrington. Prepare the arguments. Economic instability, unsafe environment, prior medical negligence. I want everything ready for when the results come out. Understood, sir. But what about the mother? Judges usually favor the biological mother. Not if the mother can't even afford a pack of diapers. Smith, the boy needs medical care costing thousands of dollars a month. She can't give him that, I can. Make it happen. Alexander hung up. He didn't feel proud. He felt practical. He was doing what he believed was best for the child. Robert would have wanted his son to have the best, right? He convinced himself of that as he put his phone away and headed toward the ICU glass. What Alexander didn't know was that the echo of the empty hallway had worked against him. A few meters away, just before. Entering the observation room, Mia had stopped to tie her shoe. She had heard the last phrases. Not fit. Custody. Economic instability. I can make it happen. Mia stood frozen. The relief from the surgery instantly transformed into a chilling terror. The man hadn't paid to save her son. He had paid to buy him. Mia looked through the glass. Ethan looked like a sleeping angel, surrounded by machines blinking with green and orange lights. His little chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm. He was alive. He was safe from the sickness, but now he faced a different danger. She glanced sideways at Alexander. The millionaire was standing a few meters away, speaking in a low voice with the hospital's head of security who had just arrived. Alexander was pointing at the ICU door, then pointed right at Mia, barking out clear instructions. Panic took hold of Mia's mind, but it wasn't hysterical. It was a cold, desperate clarity. He's going to take him away from me, she thought. The second those DNA results prove it's his blood, he'll throw me out on the street and keep my baby. I'll never see Ethan again. He'll raise him. Or worse, that horrible woman he's marrying. She remembered what Robert said about his father. He's a control freak, Mia. He doesn't love, he possesses. If he could, he'd put me in a glass case like one of his hunting trophies. She couldn't let that happen. She'd rather live under a bridge with her son than see him turn into a prisoner in a gilded cage, stuck in that cold mansion, without a mother's love. Mia saw Alexander turn toward the coffee machine down the hall, turning his back on her for just a few seconds. The guards hadn't taken their positions at the unit door yet. They were still getting their orders at the nurses' station down the hall. It was now or never. It was crazy, absolutely crazy. But a mother's instinct doesn't care about medical logic or the law. Mia pushed the ICU door, and it wasn't locked yet. The air inside was freezing and smelled like ozone. There was only one nurse at the back of the room checking on another baby, with her back turned to Ethan's incubator. Mia slipped in, silently. Her rubber soles didn't make a sound. She reached the incubator. Her heart was pounding so hard she was afraid it would wake him up. "Forgive me, my love," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "But we have to go. Mommy's gonna take care of you. No one's gonna take you away from me." With shaking hands, she opened the incubator ports. Warm, humid air rushed out. Ethan was hooked up to a heart monitor and had an IV in his little arm. Mia knew she couldn't disconnect everything without setting off the alarms. But if she was fast, if she wrapped him up and ran for the fire exit she'd seen down the hall, she lifted Ethan with infinite gentleness. He weighed so little, but as she moved him, a sensor popped off. Beep, beep, beep. The disconnect alarm went off immediately, a sharp, piercing sound that sliced through the silence. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" the nurse screamed from the back, spinning around and spotting Mia with the baby in her arms, frantically tearing the sticky leads off his chest. Mia didn't answer. She wrapped him in the hospital blanket, IV line still dangling, and bolted for the door. "Security! Code pink! Patient abduction!" the nurse screamed, slamming a panic button on the wall. Mia burst into the hallway, crashing through the swinging doors. Ethan started to cry, a weak, pitiful wail that would break your heart. But there was no freedom in the hallway, only a human wall. Alexander was right there. He'd heard the alarm. He'd dropped the coffee that was now staining the floor, and he was standing right in Mia's path, arms wide open, a look of pure shock and fury on his face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Alexander roared. Mia froze, clutching the baby to her chest, shielding him with her own body. She looked around frantically. The guards were rushing from the desk. She was trapped. "Let me out!" she screamed, backing away, cornered. "I won't give him to you. He's my son. I won't let you steal him from me." Alexander stepped toward her with caution, like approaching a jumper on a ledge. "Steal him?" Alexander looked at her, confused for a split second, until it clicked. She knew. She had guessed his plans. "Mia, are you out of your mind? That boy just got out of open-heart surgery. If you take him out of here, you'll kill him."
"You're killing your own son? I'd rather he die with me than live with you." Mia blurted out the words, born from the irrationality of absolute fear. "You destroy everything you touch."
"You destroyed Robert, and now you want to destroy us." That accusation hit Alexander harder than any physical blow. Destroyed Robert. "Give me the boy," Alexander ordered, losing his patience as he saw Ethan's IV line dripping blood onto the floor. The child was in real danger. "Look what you're doing! He's bleeding!" Mia looked down and saw the blood on the white blanket. Terror paralyzed her. Her legs gave out. Not from fear of Alexander, but from the horror of hurting her baby in her desperation. Alexander seized that second of hesitation. He lunged at her, not to attack, but to catch her before she fell. He snatched the baby from her arms with protective firmness. "Nurse!" Alexander shouted, holding little Ethan like he was made of glass, while Mia collapsed to the floor, sobbing hysterically. The medical team swarmed in, took the baby from Alexander, and rushed back to the ICU to reconnect and stabilize him. Mia remained on the hallway floor, curled up in the fetal position, screaming her son's name. Two security guards grabbed Mia by the arms, hauling her up roughly. "Shall we call the police, Mr. Harrington?" the head of security asked, pulling out handcuffs. "This is attempted kidnapping and child endangerment." Alexander just stared at his hands. There was a blood stain. Ethan's blood. His blood. He looked at Mia. She was broken, destroyed. She'd acted like a cornered animal, and he knew, deep in his dark conscience, that he was the one who set the trap. "No," Alexander said curtly. "Let her go." The guard hesitated. "She tried to take a critical patient." "I said let her go," Alexander bellowed, his voice booming down the hallway. "No police, no charges." He walked over to Mia, who was trembling uncontrollably, barely able to stand. Alexander leaned in until his face was inches from hers. "You almost killed him," he whispered with a coldness that froze the blood. "That's proof you can't take care of him. Your love is dangerous, Mia. It's irrational." He straightened up and adjusted his suit jacket. "Stay in that chair. If you move an inch, if you try to get near that door again, I will call the police. And I swear you'll spend the next 20 years in prison. Do you understand me?" Mia nodded, defeated and voiceless. She sat in the plastic chair, shrinking down until she seemed invisible. She had lost. In her attempt to save him, she'd given Alexander the perfect ammunition to take him away. At that moment, Alexander's phone vibrated. An email. The subject line read, "Private Genetic Laboratory, Paternity Results, High Priority." Alexander felt time stand still. He looked at Mia, then at the screen, and slid his finger to open the file. His eyes scanned the document quickly until he reached the conclusion at the bottom of the page. Probability of kinship. Grandfather, grandson, 99.98%. Alexander let out this breath he didn't know he was holding. It was him. It was Robert. Ethan was a Harrington. He slowly put his phone away and turned to look at the woman crying in the chair and the baby fighting for his life behind the glass. The war was over, he thought, but the battle for that boy's soul was just beginning. "He is my grandson," he said aloud so everyone in the hallway would hear him, marking his territory. Mia lifted her head with eyes full of panic, and then the elevator opened. The sound of high, sharp, rapid heels broke the post-traumatic tension of the moment. "Alexander!" Victoria's shrill, fake concerned voice echoed down the hall. "My love, they told me you were in this horrible hospital. Did something happen to you?" The villain had arrived, and the stage was set for the real conflict. The sound of Victoria's stiletto heels hitting the hospital linoleum was like an incessant hammering inside Alexander's head. She approached like a gust of expensive perfume and arrogance, her white faux fur coat clashing violently with the gray sterility of the ICU hallway. "For God's sake, Alexander," she exclaimed, scanning the hallway with a look of disgust. "I've been calling you for hours. You have a dinner with the Wall Street investors tomorrow, and you're here in this death trap smelling like cheap disinfectant." Victoria stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Mia. The housekeeper was sitting on the plastic chair, huddled up, eyes swollen, her uniform wrinkled and stained with dried blood. Victoria let out an incredulous, venomous laugh. "And her?" Victoria pointed at Mia with a perfectly manicured nail. "What is the cleaning girl doing here? Did she cut a finger scrubbing and you had to bring her? Alexander, you are too charitable. You should have just sent her in a taxi." Alexander tucked his phone into the inner pocket of his jacket. His face was a mask of stone. There was no love in his gaze toward Victoria, only a cold assessment. In that moment, comparing the genuine anguish of the poor woman in the chair with the frivolity of the rich woman standing there, something definitely broke inside him. "Shut up, Victoria," Alexander said. His voice was low, but it had the effect of a whip. Victoria blinked, offended. "Excuse me? Are you shushing me for this servant?" "She isn't here because she cut a finger," Alexander continued, ignoring her indignation. "She is here because her son is dying in that room." Victoria rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "What a tragedy. I'm very sorry, really, but that doesn't explain what you are doing here, losing millions by the minute. Is it charity? Rich man's guilt? Just give her a check and let's go." Alexander took a step toward her, invading her personal space, forcing her to back up. "I'm not going to give her a check, Victoria. I'm going to give him my last name." The silence that followed was absolute. Mia looked up, surprised by the brutality of the revelation. Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "What? What are you saying?" she finally stammered, her condescending smile crumbling. "The boy behind that glass," said Alexander, pointing at the ICU with a steady finger. "He's Robert's son. He is my grandson." Victoria went pale beneath her perfect makeup. Her eyes darted frantically from Alexander to Mia, then to the ICU window. Her calculating mind processed the intel in nanoseconds. A grandson, a direct heir. If that child lived, she'd drop to second place on the priority list. The fortune, the mansion, the power. Everything she'd secured with this engagement was now at risk, all because of a bastard baby and a maid. "You're lying!" Victoria shrieked, losing her cool. "Robert is dead! This gold digger has tricked you! It's a classic scam, Alexander! Look at her!" She pointed at Mia with disgust. "She's a penniless nobody who took advantage of your grief. She probably slept with some random guy and now wants to pin the miracle on you." Mia stood up. The insult to her honor didn't sting, but the insult to the memory of her love? That was too much. Even though she was shaking, even though she felt small among giants, a mother's dignity made her stand tall. "Don't you dare," said Mia. Her voice was cracking but firm. "You didn't know, Robert. You don't know anything." Victoria whipped around to face her like a cobra ready to strike. "Shut your mouth, you filth!" she screamed, lunging toward Mia. "How much do you want, huh? 10,000? 20,000? I'll give you the cash right now and you get the hell out of here with your bastard. Go back to your hole. Stop ruining our lives." Victoria jammed her hand into her Hermes bag, pulled out a checkbook, and tore off a slip with fury. "Here, write the amount and disappear." Mia stared at the blank check Victoria was waving in her face. With a slow, deliberate motion, she raised her hand and pushed the check away. "My son doesn't have a price tag, and neither does his father's love." Victoria, blinded by rage, raised her hand to slap Mia. "You insolent!" But her hand never reached Mia's face. Alexander intercepted it in midair, gripping Victoria's wrist with enough force to make her gasp in pain. "If you ever try to touch her again," Alexander growled, his gray eyes burning with suppressed fury, "I swear I'll have you dragged out of here and I'll ban you from every single one of my properties. It is over, Victoria." "You're hurting me," she cried out, trying to pull away. "You're choosing the maid over me. I'm your fiancé." "You are a mistake," Alexander corrected, letting her go with disdain. "And that boy is my blood." Victoria rubbed her wrist, glaring at him with pure hatred. She was about to scream something else, about to spit all her venom, when the most terrifying sound in the world cut through the argument. A long, continuous beep coming from the isolation room. The red lights above the ICU door started spinning. "Code blue in room 4. Pediatric code blue," a voice boomed over the ceiling speakers. Mia spun toward the window, pressing her hands against the glass. Inside, she watched Ethan's tiny body convulse, and then go limp. Doctors and nurses rushed in, swarming the incubator. "No! Ethan!" Mia screamed, pounding on the glass. My son! Alexander stood frozen. The argument, Victoria, the money, it all faded away. All that remained was the image of his grandson, newly found, yet slipping through his fingers like sand. Seconds later, Dr. Reynolds stepped out of the room, his white coat stained with fresh blood. He wasn't walking, he was running. "What's wrong?" Alexander asked, cutting him off. "Internal bleeding!" the doctor shouted without stopping, rummaging for something on the hallway supply cart. The valve suture gave way under the stress. "He's losing blood too fast. We need a massive transfusion right now, or he'll go into hypovolemic shock." "Then do it!" Alexander ordered. "What are you waiting for?" The doctor stopped and looked at Alexander with a look of absolute terror. "We don't have any blood." "The bank is empty for his blood type. He's O negative, Mr. Harrington. He's a universal donor, but he can only receive O negative. We called the Red Cross, but they're 20 minutes out. He doesn't have 20 minutes. He has 2. Hearing this, Mia threw herself at the doctor. "Me," she screamed, holding out her thin arms. "I'm his mother. Take all my blood. Take it all." The doctor looked at her and shook his head quickly. "We can't, ma'am. I saw your charts when you were admitted. You are severely anemic and malnourished. Your hemoglobin is at 8. If I take even 1 unit of blood from you now, you'll go into cardiac arrest yourself. It's no use killing the mother to try and save the son with low-quality blood." Mia fell to the floor, howling in pain. The helplessness felt worse than death. She had life inside her, but her body, weakened by months of starving herself to feed her baby, was failing her at the crucial moment. Victoria, watching from the corner, let out a hidden sigh of relief. Fate was solving her problem for her. Alexander looked at the doctor, then at Mia destroyed on the floor, and finally at his own hand. He remembered the day he donated blood for Robert years ago before an appendix surgery. He remembered his blood type. He took off his $1,000 jacket and threw it onto the dirty hospital floor. He started unfastening the gold cufflinks from his shirt sleeves. "Doctor," Alexander said, his voice resonating with a deathly calm amidst the chaos. "Prepare the gurney." The doctor looked at him, confused. "Sir?" Alexander rolled up his spotless white shirt, exposing his strong, veiny arm. "I'm O negative," Alexander said, walking toward the ICU door. "And I'm his grandfather. My blood is his blood. Connect me to that boy right now." The doctor nodded, a spark of hope lighting up in his eyes. "Nurse, bring the direct transfusion kit." "Fast!" Alexander walked past Victoria without looking at her. He passed Mia and stopped for a second. He put a hand on her shoulder, a heavy, firm touch. "Don't cry," he ordered her, but this time with a different tone, almost human. "I'm not going to let him die. He's a Harrington, and Harringtons don't give up." He entered the ICU and the door closed behind him, leaving Mia weeping with hope and Victoria shaking with rage. The millionaire's blood was about to mix with the poor boy's, sealing a pact that no lawyer and no villainess could ever break. The inside of the intensive care unit was a world apart. The air was cold and saturated with electronic beeps marking the fragile border between life and death. Alexander had never been in a place like this. So close to biological reality, so far from his air-conditioned boardrooms. Dr. Reynolds didn't waste time with full sterilization protocols for Alexander. The emergency dictated everything. They told him to lie down on a rolling gurney they placed parallel to Ethan's open incubator. As he lay back, Alexander turned his head. There was his grandson, so small he seemed unreal. The baby's skin was pale, almost translucent, with a bluish tint around his lips that indicated a lack of oxygen and blood. His chest was open, covered with sterile cloth soaked in bright red. Alexander felt a sharp pang in his stomach. "It's Robert," he thought. "It's my son being born again to give me a chance not to be a miserable wretch." You're going to feel a pinch this time, Mr. Harrington, the nurse said, tying a rubber band around his bicep. Alexander didn't even blink when the thick 16-gauge needle penetrated his vein. He felt no pain. The physical pain was irrelevant compared to the weight of the guilt he carried. "We'll do a modified direct transfusion," Dr. Reynolds explained, working frantically on the baby. "We'll pass your blood through a filter and straight into the child's central line. It's risky, but it's the fastest way. I need you to pump with your hand. Open and close your fist." Alexander began opening and closing his hand. He watched the clear tube coming out of his arm. He saw his blood, dark, rich, and vital, beginning to flow, moving through the plastic until it reached the baby's system. It was hypnotic. "Come on, little one," Alexander whispered, ignoring the doctors working around him. "Take this. Take my strength. Take my stubbornness." As the blood flowed, Alexander felt a little dizzy. He hadn't eaten all day, but he kept pumping his fist. Outside in the hallway, the scene was nightmarish. Mia had gotten up from the floor and was glued to the glass, watching the transfusion with a mixture of terror and adoration. She watched Alexander's blood traveling toward her son. She saw the man she had feared, the man who had despised her, giving his own life essence to save what she loved most. Victoria, unable to stand seeing her future evaporate with every drop of donated blood, approached the glass with fury. "This is ridiculous," spat Victoria, standing behind Mia. "Look at this spectacle. He's going to get sick." "That old fool is going to catch something because of your bastard son." Mia turned slowly. The weakness had vanished. The anemia was in her blood, but the strength was in her soul. She looked Victoria up and down, seeing for the first time what she really was. An empty shell wrapped in expensive clothes. "You may have all the money in the world," Mia said in a calm voice that scared Victoria more than a scream. "You may have the cars, the jewels, and the mansions, but you will never have what is happening in there." "What are you talking about, stupid?" Victoria sneered. "Blood," Mia replied. "A bond. You are just an ornament in Mr. Alexander's life." Ethan is his life, and as of today, you no longer exist to him." Victoria opened her mouth to insult her, but stopped when she saw the look from the security guards. They were also watching the scene inside the ICU with respect, and Victoria realized she was alone. She turned around and walked away, her heels clicking furiously toward the exit as she pulled out her phone to call her lawyer. If she couldn't have Alexander's love, she would take every last penny in the lawsuit for broken engagement. Inside the ICU, Ethan's heart monitor changed rhythm. The erratic, weak beeping began to get stronger. "Beep, beep, beep, the pressure is rising," the anesthesiologist announced. "Oxygen saturation at 90%. The color is coming back." Dr. Reynolds sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his forearm. "It's working. The hemorrhage is under control. The fresh blood with platelets is helping it clot." Alexander felt his vision blur. They had drawn nearly half a liter in record time. The dizziness was intense. "That's enough now, Mr. Harrington," the nurse said, placing a hand on Alexander's arm. "You've donated a full unit. If we keep going, you'll go into shock." "Keep going," Alexander murmured with a thick voice, opening and closing his fist more slowly. "If he needs more, take it. Don't stop until he's safe." "He is safe for now, sir," Dr. Reynolds said, placing a firm hand on Alexander's shoulder. "You've saved your grandson. Literally. Now let us finish closing the wound. I need you to rest." The nurse removed the needle from Alexander's arm and applied pressure. He turned his head toward the incubator one last time before exhaustion overcame him. Baby Ethan was no longer gray. His cheeks had a faint pinkish tone. And by a miracle of medicine or fate, the baby moved slightly under the sedation, his little hand closing into a fist, as if imitating the gesture his grandfather had been making minutes before. Alexander smiled. a weak but genuine smile, the first in years. "He's a fighter," Alexander whispered before closing his eyes. "Just like his father." The nurse pushed Alexander's stretcher out of the sterile zone toward the intermediate recovery area, right next to the glass where Mia was waiting. When they brought Alexander out, Mia pulled away from the window and ran toward the stretcher. She saw the powerful man, now pale and with gauze on his arm, looking mortal, looking human. Alexander opened his eyes and saw Mia leaning over him. "How is he?" he asked with a hoarse voice. "Alive?" Mia sobbed, taking Alexander's cold hand between hers without thinking. "He's pink again. He's alive thanks to you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I owe you his life." Alexander looked at their joined hands, the hands of a maid and the hands of a magnate, united by the blood of a child. "You don't owe me anything," Alexander said, withdrawing his hand gently, but without roughness. "But we have to talk, Mia, now that I know the truth. Things are going to change drastically." Mia felt a knot in her stomach. The fear returned. Would he take the child away now that he had paid for his life with his own blood? "What? What's going to happen?" she asked with fear. Alexander tried to sit up, but the nurse stopped him. "Sir, don't move." "Mia," Alexander said, ignoring the nurse and locking his eyes on her. "Pack your things. As soon as the boy is discharged, you and he are coming to the mansion." To the mansion?" Mia blinked. "To the servants' quarters?" Alexander shook his head, a shadow of pain crossing his face. "No, to Robert's room. He's going to take the place that belongs to him. And you are his mother. You can't be the maid in the house where my grandson lives. That is over." "So, are you firing me?" she asked, confused and terrified. "I'm not firing you," Alexander said, closing his eyes again. "I'm promoting you. You're going to be the mother of the Harrington heir, and I'm warning you, it's the toughest job in the world, because you'll have to deal with me every single day." Mia was left breathless. She didn't know if it was a promise of peace or a declaration of a new war. But one thing was certain: Ethan would live. Suddenly, Alexander's eyes snapped open, remembering something. "Where is Victoria?" Mia looked toward the empty hallway. "She left, sir. She said she was going to call her lawyer." Alexander let out a dry laugh. "Good. Let her call whoever she wants." He looked at Mia with intensity. "But watch your back, Mia. Victoria doesn't give up easily, and now that she knows there's an heir, she'll become even more dangerous. She doesn't want to be a mother. She wants to be a millionaire widow. And that boy is an obstacle to her." The warning tone froze Mia's blood. They had saved Ethan from the sickness, but now they had to save him from greed. "I will protect him," Mia said fiercely. "We both will," Alexander corrected. "Now let me sleep 10 minutes. I have to buy an entire hospital tomorrow morning to make sure no one ever says no to my grandson again because of a lack of money." Mia looked at him in astonishment. The monster was turning into a guardian, but old monsters have habits that are hard to kill. 10 days passed. 10 days in which the city hospital became a besieged fortress. The hallways of the pediatric ward, usually noisy and chaotic, had been transformed into a zone of reverential silence, patrolled by men in black suits with earpieces. Alexander Harrington hadn't spared any expense. He had rented the entire wing to guarantee that no virus, no bacteria, and above all, no wanted visitors, specifically Victoria, would get anywhere near the incubator where Ethan was miraculously recovering. The day of the medical discharge dawned gray and rainy, but for Alexander, it was the brightest day of the decade. Mia was finishing folding the few clothes she had into a plastic supermarket bag. She felt small, out of place. During those 10 days, Alexander had treated her with a cold and distant courtesy, as if she were a valuable piece of porcelain that couldn't be broken, but one you couldn't have a conversation with. He spent the hours sitting next to the crib, watching the baby with an obsession that bordered on madness, monitoring every milliliter of milk he drank, every gram he gained. "Leave that," Alexander ordered from the doorway. He was wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, and his presence filled the small recovery room. Mia jumped, clutching the bag against her chest. "It's my things, sir. My uniform, my old shoes." "Throw it away," he said sharply. "Nothing that entered this hospital leaves with you. That clothing smells of poverty and the past, and my grandson is not going to live with either of those things." He gestured, and 2 nurses entered with boxes from exclusive boutiques. "Put this on. The car is waiting downstairs, and be quick. I don't like making the security detail wait." Mia opened the first box. There was a soft wool dress, cream-colored, a matching coat, and leather boots, clothes that cost more than what she had earned in 5 years of scrubbing floors. She felt disguised. She felt bought, but she looked at Ethan, who was already dressed in an organic cotton onesie that Alexander had ordered from a high-end brand in California, and she nodded. She would swallow her pride. She would do it for him. Leaving the hospital was controlled chaos. Alexander hadn't hired a limousine. He had bought a high-end private ambulance, equipped like a mobile intensive care unit, just for the 30-minute transfer to the mansion in the Hamptons. When they walked out the rear loading bay, the flash of cameras blinded them. "Mr. Harrington! Mr. Harrington!" shouted the journalists, crushed behind the security barriers. "Is it true the baby is your illegitimate grandson? Is it true you canceled your wedding to Victoria Langford for the maid?" Mia lowered her head, terrified by the noise and the aggression of the questions. Instinctively, she shielded the baby with her body, even though Ethan was safe inside the transport pod. Alexander stopped for a second. Just one. He glared at the journalists with a ferocity that made several lower their cameras. "He is not illegitimate," Alexander roared, his voice booming over the tumult. "He is the sole heir to the Harrington fortune, and whoever dares harass him will meet my lawyers." He gently steered Mia into the armored ambulance and climbed in after her. The doors shut, blocking out the noise of the world. The ride was silent. Mia watched through the tinted window as the city changed. They left behind the gray neighborhoods, the public hospital, the pothole-filled streets, and began to climb toward the Hamptons, where people lived who never looked at prices in the supermarket. Upon arriving at the Harrington mansion, the wrought iron gate opened slowly. Mia felt a knot in her stomach. She knew that entrance. She had crossed it hundreds of times on foot, entering through the side service door, showing her bag to the guard to prove she wasn't stealing anything. Today, the car drove up the main driveway, circling the marble fountain, but the real blow came when they went inside. The entire staff was lined up in the lobby. The butler, James, the cook, Mrs. Davis. The other 2 cleaning girls Mia had shared Tupperware lunches with in the kitchen. Everyone was standing there, rigid. When Alexander entered with the baby in his arms, because he wouldn't allow anyone else to carry the pod, the silence was deathly. Then entered Mia, walking insecurely in her expensive new clothes. The looks from her former co-workers were poisoned darts. There was no joy. There was confusion, envy, and judgment. Mrs. Davis looked at her with a mix of surprise and disdain, as if saying, "You? You little two-faced sneak." James, the butler, kept his eyes front, but his jaw was tight. To them, she wasn't the heir's mother. She was the employee who had slept with the boss's son to hit the jackpot. "Listen to me, everyone," said Alexander, standing in the center of the lobby beneath the immense crystal chandelier. "Things have changed. This is Ethan Harrington, my grandson." A murmur ran through the line of employees. "And she," Alexander pointed at Mia without looking at her. "Is Ethan's mother. From today on, she will live here. She will take orders from no one except me. And I demand she be treated with the respect due to the mother of my blood. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they replied in unison, but the tone was mechanical, cold. "James," Alexander continued, "I've fired the outside cleaning crew. I don't want strangers in the house. You all will handle everything, and I want the upper floor completely sterilized twice a day. If I see a single speck of dust near the boys' room, I'm firing all of you." Alexander started up the grand marble staircase. "Come, Mia," he ordered. Mia climbed the steps, feeling their gazes burning into her back. She felt like an intruder in her own life. "I've got your room ready," Alexander said as they walked down the long upstairs hallway. Mia expected to be taken to a guest room, but Alexander stopped in front of a solid double oak door at the end of the hall, the door that had always been locked. The door nobody was allowed to clean, except Alexander himself. Robert's room. Alexander opened the door. Mia stifled a gasp. It wasn't the young adult's room she remembered from the photos. Alexander had transformed it into a luxury medical bunker. The walls were painted a pale blue. There were state-of-the-art monitors, a crib that looked like a spaceship, and industrial air purifiers humming softly in the corners. But the most shocking thing wasn't the tech. It was the walls. Alexander had filled the walls with photos of Robert. Giant photos. Blow-ups of happy moments Mia didn't know existed. Robert on a yacht. Robert graduating from Harvard. Robert laughing at a family barbecue. It was a shrine to the dead, now inhabited by a living baby. "He'll be safe here," Alexander said, placing the baby in the crib with extreme gentleness. "I've hired 3 specialized nurses. They'll work 8-hour shifts. You won't have to worry about a thing. They'll feed him, change him, and monitor his vitals. Your only job is to rest and recover." Mia felt a sudden chill. "Excuse me?" she asked, stepping closer to the crib. "I'm not going to take care of him?" "You don't have the training, Mia," Alexander replied naturally, checking a monitor. "Ethan is a recovering cardiac patient. He needs professionals. You can visit him, play with him when he's awake, but the care is medical." "I'm his mother," Mia protested, feeling the nightmare of the hospital repeating itself. "I know how to change a diaper. I know when he's hungry. I don't need a degree to love my son." Alexander turned, his face hardening. "Love didn't save Robert," he said with unintentional cruelty. "Medicine and discipline will save Ethan. We are not discussing this. You're weak. Look at you. You're pale. Go to your room. It's right next door. Connected by that internal door." Alexander pointed to a side door. "Rest, Mia. That is an order." Mia looked at her son, who was sleeping, oblivious to the territorial battle over his crib. Then she looked at Alexander, the grandfather who believed control was the same thing as love. She realized she had walked into a gilded cage. She had saved her son's life, yes, but now she had to fight not to lose her motherhood to the obsession of a man tormented by guilt. She nodded slowly, without saying a word, and retreated to her room. But not to sleep, but to think. That night, the first night in the mansion, would be decisive. The Harrington mansion at night was a terrifying place. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was empty. The hallways were too long, and the ceilings were way too high. Mia lay in the king-size bed of her new room, the silk sheets feeling cold against her skin. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hospital monitors. It was 3 in the morning. Her maternal instinct, that biological clock that doesn't care about nurses or shifts, jolted her awake. She felt a tightness in her chest. "Ethan," she thought. She got up barefoot, ignoring the plush slippers they'd left for her. She walked toward the connecting door that led to the baby's room. She turned the knob carefully, trying not to make a sound. The room was dim, lit only by the bluish glow of the monitors, but what she saw made her blood run cold. The nurse on duty, an older, sour-faced woman named Helen, was sitting in a rocking chair with headphones on, staring at her phone. Ethan was shifting in his crib, restless, making little sounds of distress, looking for comfort. He was starting to cry, but the nurse didn't even look up. Mia felt a primitive rage. She crossed the room like a ghost and reached the crib. "He's crying," Mia said loudly, startling the nurse. Helen yanked off her headphones, annoyed. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be in here. Mr. Harrington gave strict instructions not to mess with the baby's sleep schedule. If you pick him up every time he makes a noise, you're going to spoil him. Let him cry a little. It's good for his lungs." "He has a 20-centimeter scar on his chest," Mia hissed, her eyes flashing with fire. "Crying hurts him, and if you won't take care of him, get the hell out of here." Mia reached into the crib and picked Ethan up. As soon as the baby smelled his mother's scent and felt the familiar beat of her heart, he calmed down almost instantly. His sobs turned into little, ragged sighs. Mia cradled him against her shoulder, gently kissing his head, ignoring the wires. "I'm going to have to report this to Mr. Alexander," the nurse threatened, standing up. "You are interfering with medical protocol. Report me to the Pope for all I care," Mia replied without looking at her, rocking her son. "But no one is going to deny my son his mother's arms. No one." The hallway door opened. Alexander was standing there. He wasn't wearing his suit of armor. He had a dark silk robe over his pajamas, and his hair was messy. He looked older, more tired. He'd heard their voices through the baby monitor in his own room. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice raspy with sleep. "Mr. Harrington," Nurse Helen stepped forward with professional indignation. "The mother insists on holding the patient. The boy needs to sleep according to the schedule, but she—" Alexander raised his hand, silencing her. He walked into the room slowly. His eyes locked onto Mia. She was standing by the window, the moonlight illuminating her profile and the small bundle she was holding. Ethan was completely calm in her arms, his tiny hand clutching a loose lock of Mia's hair. The image hit Alexander like a freight train. It was like traveling back in time 30 years. He saw his wife, Elena, right there in that same room, in that exact same position, holding Robert when he was just a colicky baby. He remembered how Elena used to sing softly to him. He remembered how he, Alexander, used to just stand in the doorway, too busy to even come inside, thinking raising babies was women's work, and his job was just making money. So much time wasted, so many hugs he never gave. "Get out," Alexander said, not taking his eyes off Mia. The nurse smiled triumphantly. "See, ma'am, give him to me." "No," Alexander said, turning his head toward the nurse with an icy stare. "I told you to get out of this room." "Wait in the hallway." The nurse's jaw dropped. She stammered an apology and rushed out, closing the door behind her. Alexander and Mia were left alone in the dim light. The only sound was Ethan's rhythmic breathing and the hum of the machines. Mia held the baby tighter, waiting for the scolding, waiting for him to tell her she was unfit, that she was risking the boy's health. Alexander stepped closer, walking until he stood right in front of her, looking down at the baby sleeping on her shoulder. "He looks just like him," Alexander whispered. His voice cracked. That iron mask he'd worn for years finally cracked. "When you hold him like that, he looks so much like Robert." Mia saw something in the millionaire's eyes she never expected to see. Tears, held back tears from a man who had forgotten how to cry. "He loved you, sir," Mia said softly. "Robert used to talk to me about you, not with hate, but with sadness. He just wanted you to be proud of his paintings, not just his business deals." Alexander slumped into the rocking chair where the nurse had been. He buried his face in his hands. The shoulders of the most powerful man in the city began to shake. "I killed him," Alexander confessed, his voice muffled by his hands. "That night, the night of the accident, he came to see me. He wanted to tell me something. He was nervous, but happy. Probably wanted to tell me about you. About him." He pointed at the baby. "And I didn't let him speak. I yelled at him. I told him he was a disappointment. I told him if he didn't sign that merger contract with the tech firm, he wasn't my son anymore." Alexander looked up, his face red with shame and grief. "He left here crying in rage. And an hour later, the police called. I drove him to that highway. I killed him, Mia. And I've lived every single damn day in this hell, knowing my son died, thinking his father hated him." Mia felt her heart clench. The monster wasn't a monster. He was just a man, broken by the heaviest guilt there is. She approached him carefully, not as an employee, but as an equal. She sat on the edge of the bed, close to the rocking chair. "He didn't die hating you," Mia said. "Robert told me once. My old man is tough because he's scared. He's scared the world will chew me up if I'm not a shark like him." He understood Alexander. He didn't agree with it, but he understood it. Mia took Ethan's hand and reached it out toward Alexander. "Touch him." Alexander hesitated. He looked at his own big, rough hand. "I can't. I might hurt him." "You gave him your blood," Mia said firmly. "You gave him life twice. Touch him." Alexander reached out a trembling finger and stroked the baby's open palm. In his sleep, Ethan curled his tiny fingers around his grandfather's index finger. He held on tight. A sob escaped Alexander's throat. It was an ugly, guttural sound, pure pain bubbling to the surface. "I'm sorry," Alexander sobbed, leaning forward until his forehead rested against Mia's knee, right next to the baby. "I'm so sorry. I treated you like trash. I thought the worst of you. And you're the only one who cared for the child I cast aside." Mia, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, placed her free hand on the millionaire's graying head. "It's over now," she whispered. "We're here. He is here. You have a second chance, Don Alexander. Don't waste it on rules and nurses. Love him. Just love him." They stayed like that for a long time, the millionaire kneeling before the maid and the baby in a baptism of tears and forgiveness. But the peace in the Harrington mansion was fragile. While they were healing old wounds upstairs, downstairs, the private phone in Alexander's study began to ring. No one answered it. It was his lawyer, Smith, and the message he was about to leave on the answering machine would change the tone of the night. "Mr. Harrington, we have a serious problem. Victoria has leaked a story to the press about Mia, and not only that, she has contacted someone from Mia's past, someone who claims to be the real father. Brace yourself. This is going to blow up tomorrow at dawn." Upstairs, inside the bubble of the blue room, Alexander lifted his head, feeling lighter. "Tomorrow," he said, wiping away his tears and regaining a bit of his usual composure. "Tomorrow, I'm getting rid of all these machines. I want this to be a boys' room, not a hospital, and I'm firing that nurse, Helen. You were right. You're the mother. You run things here." Mia smiled, relieved. "Thank you. And one more thing." Alexander stood up, looking seriously at Mia. "Tomorrow, I'm calling the notary. I'm going to legally recognize Ethan, and I'm changing my will. You will be the executor until he comes of age. No one will be able to kick you out of this house, ever." It seemed like a happy ending, but neither of them heard the whirring of the fax machine in the study downstairs, printing out a fake paternity lawsuit, fabricated by the scorned woman who wasn't willing to lose her millions. The Cold War was over. The dirty war had just begun. The next morning at the Harrington mansion seemed like something out of a fairy tale Alexander never thought he'd live to see. Sunlight streamed in through the large windows of the main dining room, illuminating the silverware that hadn't been used since the death of his wife, Elena. But the real light didn't come from the sun, but from the scene at the head of the table. Alexander, the feared real estate shark, was sitting there, not checking the stock market on his iPad, but holding a baby bottle with surgical concentration. Ethan, clean, pink, and dressed in a white linen romper, was drinking eagerly in his grandfather's arms. Mia was seated to his right. She wasn't wearing her maid uniform. She was wearing the cream-colored dress Alexander had bought for her. And although she felt strange sitting at the table instead of serving it, Alexander's smile as he looked at the baby gave her a peace she had never known. "He has the appetite of a Harrington," Alexander commented, wiping a drop of milk from the baby's chin with a linen napkin. Robert ate the same way, always in a hurry, as if the world were going to end before dessert. Mia smiled, taking a sip of coffee. For the first time, the coffee tasted like freedom and not exhaustion. "He likes his milk warm, sir. Not too hot, not too cold. He's demanding." "He is not demanding. He has standards," Alexander corrected, winking an eye. "Something unheard of for him. And please, Mia, stop calling me sir. I am your son's grandfather." "Call me Alexander, or at least Don Alexander if you feel uncomfortable. But sir is for the employees. You are family." The word family was left floating in the air, warm and perfect. But the peace in the Harrington mansion was a bubble too fragile to last. The sound of the main gate intercom shattered the moment. It was an insistent, aggressive buzz. James, the butler, entered the dining room with a pale face. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he held the empty silver tray. "Don Alexander," James murmured, looking nervously toward the entrance. "We have a situation at the gate." "Tell them to leave," Alexander replied, without looking up from the baby. "I am not receiving anyone today. I'm busy with my grandson." "Sir, these are not normal visitors." "It is Miss Victoria, and she is coming. She is coming with the press and the police, and with a man shouting that you have kidnapped his son." Alexander froze. The bottle stopped in midair. Ethan let out a whimper of protest. Mia felt the blood freeze in her veins. The toast fell from her hand onto the plate. "What man?" Mia asked with a threat of a voice. "I don't know, ma'am," James replied. "A rough-looking guy who calls himself the Gator." Alexander handed the baby to Mia with slow, controlled movements. His face, which seconds before was that of a loving grandfather, transformed back into the granite mask of the ruthless tycoon. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "Stay here," he ordered Mia. "Do not go out under any circumstances. James, close the dining room doors. Let no one enter." "I am going with you." Mia stood up, hugging Ethan. "If there is someone out there telling lies about my son, I have to show my face." "Mia, don't you know what Victoria is capable of?" "I know what a mother is capable of," she retorted with fire in her eyes. "I am no longer the maid hiding in the kitchen, Alexander. You said I am the heir's mother. Well, treat me like one." Alexander looked at her for a second, evaluating her strength. He nodded gravely. "Fine, but don't separate from me. And cover the boy's face. I don't want photos." They walked together toward the foyer. As the massive oak front door opened, the chaos hit them like a physical slap. On the other side of the perimeter gate, a crowd of photographers fired their flashes like machine guns. In the center of the driveway, having forced the pedestrian gate, stood Victoria. She looked impeccable, dressed in black like a grieving widow, with dark glasses and a poorly disguised expression of triumph. By her side was a lawyer with a reptilian face and a folder in hand, and next to them a man. A dirty man with neck tattoos, a tank top, and a defiant attitude. And behind them, 2 police patrols with their lights on. "There they are!" shouted Victoria theatrically, pointing at Alexander and Mia. "There is the kidnapper and his accomplice!" The journalists lunged against the bars. Alexander raised a hand demanding silence with such authority that the murmur turned down in volume. "What is the meaning of this circus, Victoria?" Alexander demanded, his voice booming across the entrance. "You have 3 seconds to get off my property before I release the hounds or call the commissioner to have you arrested for trespassing." Victoria took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were falsely teary. "I didn't come here to fight, Alexander. I came to bring justice. I came to open your eyes." She turned to the filthy man beside her. "Speak to him, Jack. Tell him who you are." The man, Jack, stepped forward, spat on the ground, and looked at Mia with a lewd grin that turned her stomach. "Hey there, dollface," Jack rasped. "Did you forget about me already? Forget about our nights at the Paradise Motel?" Mia took a step back, horrified. "Who are you?" she screamed. "I have never seen you in my life!" "Liar," Jack bellowed, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. "I'm the father of that brat. I've got photos, I've got messages. You told me you were going to squeeze money out of the rich old man by making him believe it was his grandson. You told me it was our plan to stop being poor." The crowd of reporters gasped. The cameras focused on Mia, searching for guilt on her face. Alexander felt a fleeting doubt, a poisonous sting in his brain. And yet, he didn't remember the DNA. He remembered the blood. He remembered Robert's look in the baby. "That is a lie," Alexander shouted. "I have a DNA test confirming my kinship." Victoria's lawyer stepped forward, smiling smugly. "A test done in your private laboratory, Mr. Harrington, without legal chain of custody, without impartial witnesses." The lawyer held up the folder. "I have an emergency court order right here, signed by the family court judge 1 hour ago. Paternity is being contested. This, again, Mr. Jack Miller claims custody of his alleged son, and until an official court-ordered DNA test is performed, the minor must be placed in neutral state custody." "What?" Mia felt the world crashing down on her. She squeezed Ethan so tight the baby started to cry. "He's my son! No one is taking him from me!" "The law is the law," Victoria said, crossing her arms. "The police are here to execute the order. We're doing it for the child's own good. Alexander, you can't have a baby living a lie. Hand him over to social services." A police officer, looking like he didn't want to be there but bound by the court order, approached the door. "Mr. Harrington, ma'am, please, don't make this difficult. We have to take the minor. It will just be for a few days until the test results come out." Alexander looked at the officer. He looked at Victoria, who was smiling victoriously. He looked at the filthy man polluting the air with his presence, and then he looked at Mia, who was trembling with pure terror, tears streaming down her face, shaking her head like a lost little girl. In that moment, Alexander Harrington stopped being the civilized businessman. With a quick movement, he shoved Mia behind him, shielding her with his body. "Officer," Alexander said, his voice so low and dangerous that the nearest reporters stopped writing. "If you take one more step toward this door, it will be the last step you ever take with that badge on your chest." "Mr. Harrington, it's a court order," the officer tried to say, placing his hand on his holster. "Like I give a damn about a court order," Alexander roared, losing his temper. "This is my grandson. This is my house. And nobody, listen to me closely, nobody is going to touch a single hair on this boy's head while I still breathe." Alexander pulled out his phone and speed-dialed a number. "Seal the perimeter," he shouted into the phone. "Armed security at the main entrance. Activate intrusion protocol now." Within seconds, 6 of the mansion's private security guards, ex-military men armed with tactical rifles, burst from the bushes and surrounded the entrance, weapons lowered but making their presence very clear. The police backed off. The press backed off. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. You're insane, Victoria screamed, her smile vanishing. This is kidnapping. Are you obstructing justice? No, Victoria, Alexander said, regaining his deadly composure. This is war. You brought your clowns to my circus. Now you're going to see how the lions roar. He turned toward the alleged father, Jack. And you? Alexander pointed a finger at him. You have 5 minutes to confess who paid you, because I swear my investigation team will find out even the color of the underwear you were wearing the day you were born. And when I discover that this is a fraud, you won't just go to jail. You'll wish you were in jail. Jack hesitated, glancing at Victoria with doubt. Real fear appeared in his cheap crook eyes when he saw the guns and the millionaire's fury. Don't listen to him, Victoria shrieked. He's just a bluffing old man, officer. Go in there and get that boy. The lead officer raised his hands. Mr. Harrington, lower your weapons. We can resolve this by talking, but the order stands. The order is based on false testimony, Alexander stated. Give me an hour. 1 hour to prove this man is an actor. If I don't prove it in an hour, I'll take the boy to the station myself. The officer hesitated. He knew Harrington's power. He knew that if he went in by force, it would be a political bloodbath, and maybe a real one too. 1 hour, the officer conceded, but nobody leaves the property. Alexander nodded. Let's go inside, he told Mia, guiding her gently. We have 60 minutes to destroy Victoria forever. They slammed the oak door right in the press's faces. Silence returned to the lobby, but now it was an electric silence, charged with adrenaline. Mia collapsed onto the first sofa she found, sobbing hysterically over Ethan's head. They're going to take him. That man knows things. He said the name of the motel. Alexander knelt in front of her, grabbing her by the shoulders. Mia, look at me. Look at me. He shook her shoulders slightly until she focused her eyes. That motel is the most famous one on the bad side of town. Everyone knows it. It's a script. Victoria gave him a script. But how are we going to prove it in an hour? She sobbed. They have papers, they have lawyers. We only have the truth, and rich people don't care about the truth. Alexander smiled, a twisted, dark smile. You're wrong, my dear. The only thing we rich people care about is the truth when we can buy it. But in this case, we're going to extract it. Alexander stood up and looked at James. James, bring the man. Which man, sir? The father. Jack, go out and tell him I want to offer him a deal. Tell him I'll give him $100,000 if he comes in to talk to me for 5 minutes. Just him. No lawyers, no Victoria. Sir, James said, scandalized. He's gonna pay the blackmailer. No, Alexander said, loosening his tie like a boxer before the final round. I'm buying his betrayal. Victoria made a rookie mistake. She hired a cheap mercenary, and mercenaries don't have loyalty. They have a price tag. Alexander walked toward his office. Mia, come with me. I need you in the room. I need you to see how you kill a snake, by cutting off its head. Alexander's office was a fortress of mahogany and leather, soaked in the smell of expensive tobacco and hard choices. Alexander sat behind his massive desk, placing a metal briefcase on the polished surface. He didn't open it. He just left it there, like an object of desire and mystery. Mia sat in an armchair in the corner, rocking, Ethan trying to keep him calm, even though her own heart was beating like a war drum. The door opened. James ushered Jack in. The man walked in looking all around, dazzled by the luxury, but trying to keep up his tough guy act. But without Victoria and the lawyer by his side, he looked smaller, more vulgar. Shut the door, James, Alexander ordered, and stay outside. Jack ran his tongue over his teeth, eyeing the briefcase. So the old man wants to cut a deal, huh? Jack said with a nervous chuckle. I knew you'd crack. 100,000 is too low, right? My son's worth more. Or maybe your maid's silence is worth more. Alexander didn't answer. He just stared at him with those gray eyes that had made CEOs cry. He drummed his fingers on the briefcase. Sit, Alexander said. Jack sat down, sprawling out in the leather chair. Look, Don Alexander, it's simple. You give me $500,000, and I forget about the kid. I vanish. I'll say I was wrong, that I confused her with someone else, but if not, I'm taking the brat. And believe me, I'm not a good dad. Maybe I'll drop him, or maybe I'll forget to feed him. Mia gasped. You bastard, she screamed. He's a sick baby. Quiet, Mia, Alexander said calmly, never taking his eyes off Jack. So, $500,000. Victoria promised you 50,000, right? Maybe 20? Jack blinked, shocked by the accuracy. Victoria promised me. Doesn't matter. It matters because you're being ripped off, Jack. Alexander popped the briefcase open. It was packed with stacks of cash, used bills, unmarked. The scent of money filled the room. Here's 200,000 in cash. Yours. Right now. Jack's eyes practically popped out of his head. He licked his lips. For real? On one condition. Alexander pulled a digital recorder from his pocket and set it on the table. Repeat what you just said. That Victoria hired you, that you aren't the father, and that this whole thing is a sham. Jack looked at the cash, then the recorder, then Alexander. Greed was battling fear. If I talk, she'll kill me. She's got heavy hitters. She has no one, Alexander scoffed. She's a spoiled brat playing gangster. I am the gangster, Jack. You take this money and confess, and I'll put you on a private jet to Miami this afternoon. New life, drinks, the beach, but if you don't take it... Alexander slammed the briefcase shut. The sound cracked like a gunshot. If you don't take it, I'm walking out there and telling the officer you came here to extort me. And I have cameras. He pointed to a hidden lens on the bookshelf. I have your confession. $500,000 or the kid suffers. That's aggravated kidnapping, Jack. That's 40 years behind bars in a prison where I've got plenty of friends who'll give you a very special welcome. Jack's face went pale. He realized he'd walked right into the lion's den. There was no way out. It was either take the money and run, or rot in jail and burn in hell. You'll get me out of the country? Jack asked, his voice shaking. Right now. Jack glanced at Mia, then at Alexander. He let out a sigh, crushed by the sheer power of money and fear. All right. That crazy woman found me yesterday. She tracked me down at a bar, gave me $5,000 up front and a script, told me exactly what to say. I don't even know the lady, and I don't even like kids. I just wanted the cash. Alexander cracked a smile. He hit the stop button on the recorder. Wise choice. Alexander picked up the phone from the desk. James, send in the police officer and Victoria. Tell them I accept their terms. What? Jack jumped up, terrified. You said you'd get me out of here. And I will, but first, we're going to enjoy the show. Sit down and shut up. Minutes later, the door opened. Victoria walked in beaming, followed by her lawyer and the police officer. I knew you'd come to your senses, Alexander, Victoria said, strutting in like she owned the place. It's for the best. Hand over the boy and let's avoid a scandal. Alexander remained seated, radiating a terrifying calm. Officer, Alexander said, before you execute that order, I'd like you to hear something. New evidence that's come up in the last 5 minutes. Victoria frowned. She looked at Jack, who was sweating in his chair, staring at the floor. "What evidence?" the lawyer asked. "The law is clear." Alexander hit play on the recorder, blasting the sound through the office's high-fidelity speakers. Jack's voice filled the room, loud and clear. "That crazy woman found me yesterday. Gave me $5,000 up front. I don't even know the lady, I just wanted the cash." The color drained from Victoria's face. She turned white as a sheet. The lawyer slammed his folder shut and took a step back, physically distancing himself from her. This is edited. It's a trick," Victoria stammered, but her voice was shaking. Alexander stood up, grabbing the briefcase. "It's not a trick. It's a confession." He looked at the officer. "Officer, I believe that court order was based on perjury and procedural fraud, and I believe what we have here is an attempted extortion orchestrated by Miss Langford." The police officer, who was no fool and could see which way the wind was blowing, turned toward Victoria. His attitude shifted from submissive to accusatory. "Miss Langford, is this true?" "It's a lie!" Victoria screamed, losing her composure and pointing at Jack. "That junkie is lying. Alexander bought him off." "Of course I bought him off," Alexander admitted with brutal honesty. "I paid more than you could ever offer. But the truth is the truth, no matter who pays for it." Alexander walked around the desk and stood right in front of Victoria. She, who had always looked down on him with arrogance, now shrank before his height and his fury. "I warned you, Victoria. I told you to stay away. You could have walked away with your dignity and your jewels, but no, you decided to attack a baby. My blood." Alexander leaned into her ear and whispered words only she could hear, words that destroyed her more than any scream could. "I'm going to cancel your credit cards. I'm going to talk to your father and tell him exactly what you spend his money on. I'm going to close every door of high society to you. From today on, you are a pariah. No one will invite you to so much as a baptism." Victoria let out a sob, a spoiled, terrified brat. She looked at her lawyer, but he was already packing his things. "I'm out," the lawyer said. "I was not informed of the fraudulent nature of this lawsuit. I am withdrawing my representation." "You can't leave me!" Victoria screamed. "Officer," Alexander said loudly, "I want to press charges against Miss Langford for defamation, harassment, and attempted fraud, and I want a restraining order of 500 meters. If she steps on this sidewalk again, I want her in handcuffs." The officer nodded. "Miss, come outside with us. We need to take your statement." Victoria looked at Alexander with pure hatred, then at Mia, who was still hugging her son in the corner. "This isn't over!" Victoria shrieked as the officer grabbed her by the arm. "You're going to pay for this, you maid! You and that bastard!" "Get her out," Alexander ordered with disgust. As the door closed behind her and Victoria's screams faded into the hallway, a heavy silence fell over the office. Jack remained in the chair, staring at the briefcase. "And me?" he asked. "Am I going to Miami?" Alexander looked at him with contempt. "Take the money and get out. You have 10 minutes to disappear. If I ever see you near my family again, there won't be police. There will be an accident." Jack grabbed the briefcase and ran like the devil was chasing him. Alexander was left alone with Mia and Ethan. He exhaled a long sigh, as if he had been holding his breath for an hour. He loosened the knot of his tie and rubbed his face with his hands. Mia stood up slowly. Her legs were still trembling, but she walked toward him. "Alexander," she said softly. Alexander looked up. He seemed exhausted. "It's over, Mia. No one will ever doubt again. No one will ever attack you two again. I promise." Mia looked at the man who had just bribed, threatened, and destroyed to protect them. He wasn't a saint, he was a powerful sinner, but he was her sinner. "You are a lion, Don Alexander," she said with admiration. "A terrifying lion." Alexander smiled weakly and reached out his arms toward the baby. "Let me hold him. I need to know he's real. I need to feel that we won." Mia handed Ethan to him. The baby, oblivious to the violence and the money, yawned and rested his little head on his grandfather's shoulder. Alexander closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of talcum powder and milk. "We won, little one. We won." But while calm returned to the office, Alexander knew something Mia didn't, that Victoria, humiliated and destroyed, was now more dangerous than ever. A wounded animal attacks without logic, and although he had won the legal battle, he sensed that the final blow from Victoria wouldn't be with lawyers, but with something much more personal and painful. "Mia," Alexander said, opening his eyes, "tomorrow we are going on a trip." "A trip? To where?" "To California. To my estate in Napa Valley. We need to disappear for a while until the dust settles." "And is there someone there who needs to meet Ethan?" "Who?" asked Mia. "My sister. The boy's great aunt. The only person in the world who is tougher than I am." Alexander smiled. "And the only one who can teach you to be a true Harrington." The chapter of the maid was closing. The chapter of the heiress was about to begin, and Napa Valley didn't know what was coming. The private Gulfstream G6250 of the Harrington family cut through the clouds over the continent at 1,000 kilometers per hour. But inside the cabin, time seemed to have stood still. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a silence of transition, like that exact moment right before dawn breaks after a fierce, stormy night. Mia was sitting in a cream leather armchair, staring out the oval window. Below, there was only endless landscape. On her lap, Ethan slept peacefully, unaware that he was crossing the country, unaware that his life of poverty had evaporated forever. Alexander was sitting across from her, holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. He wasn't looking at his documents or his tablet. He was looking at her. "Stop shrinking yourself," Alexander said suddenly, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the turbines. Mia startled and straightened her back instinctively. "I'm sorry, Don Alexander." "It's force of habit. Don't apologize. I've told you 1,000 times. Look me in the eyes when I speak to you." Alexander set the glass on the side table and leaned forward. "In Napa Valley, my sister Catherine is going to analyze you like a hawk. If she sees you shrinking away, she'll eat you alive. We Harringtons do not bow our heads, Mia, not before presidents and not before death. And now you carry the burden of raising one." "You have to believe it." Mia stroked her son's back. "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be, Alexander. 2 weeks ago, I was scrubbing your toilets. Now I'm wearing $500 shoes and going to California. I feel like I'm in a costume. I feel like at any moment someone is going to shout, 'Cut!' and I'll be back in my damp room." Alexander smiled, a tired but affectionate smile. "Money doesn't change who you are, Mia. It only amplifies what you already have inside. Victoria had millions and she was miserable. You had nothing, and you gave your son the one thing money can't buy. Life." Alexander pointed at the baby. "Robert fell in love with you for that. Not for your clothes, but for your backbone. He saw the strength in you that I tried to break in him. So do it for him. Be the queen he saw." Those words were the fuel Mia needed. She nodded, wiping away a sneaky tear. "I will." The plane began its descent toward Napa Valley. The landscape shifted from plains to the rolling hills, vineyards, and golden tones of the California wine country. They landed on a private runway surrounded by grapevines. The warm breeze of California welcomed them as they walked down the steps. A black car was waiting. The drive to the estate, Solitude Vineyard, was a journey through Alexander's family history. The estate was imposing, a historic ranch house with stone walls, wooden beams and courtyards full of lavender and fountains of crystal-clear water. But the air there was different. It was heavy. It was a place of old traditions. At the main entrance, leaning on an ebony cane with a silver handle, waited Catherine Harrington, Alexander's older sister. She was 70 years old. She was dressed in simple elegance, a tradition she'd kept since her husband's death decades ago, and she had the same piercing gray eyes as her brother. Mia got out of the car with Ethan in her arms. She felt the urge to curtsy, to look for the service entrance, but she remembered Alexander's words on the plane. "Don't bow your head." She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and walked straight toward the matriarch. Alexander approached his sister and gave her a formal kiss on both cheeks. "Catherine, you look strong." "And you look old, brother," she shot back, her voice sounding like sandpaper. "The scandals have given you gray hair." Catherine shifted her gaze toward Mia. She scanned her from head to toe, pausing on her shoes, on her hands, which no longer had calluses but bore the scars of work, and finally, on the baby. "So, this is the girl," Catherine said, without addressing Mia directly. "And this is the cause of all the fuss." Mia stepped forward. "My name is Mia, ma'am, and this is Ethan, your great-nephew." Catherine raised an eyebrow, surprised by the audacity. She approached slowly. With a bony hand, she pulled back the blanket covering the baby's face. Ethan, woken by the sunlight, blinked and let out a little yawn, stretching his hands toward the old woman's wrinkled face. The world stopped for a second. Catherine, the Iron Lady, the one who never smiled, felt the baby's tiny fingers graze her cheek. Her eyes filled with tears. "Good Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He has Robert's mouth, and our father's stubborn look." Catherine looked at Mia, this time straight in the eyes. "Come in," she ordered, but her tone was no longer one of rejection, but of invitation. "The valley wind is bad for children. Come inside. This is your home." That night at dinner, there were no judgments, only stories. Catherine shared anecdotes about Robert when he used to summer there as a boy. Stories Alexander didn't know because he was always working. Mia listened, absorbing every word, building an image of the father for her son. "We'll do something," Alexander said at the end of dinner, tapping the table gently. "Tomorrow we'll go to the family chapel. Robert isn't buried here. His body is in New York, but his soul, he loved this place. I want to hold a ceremony, a closure." A year later, the spring sun in Napa Valley was soft and scented with blooming vines. The Solitude Vineyard estate had changed. It was no longer a silent and austere place. In the central courtyard, where once only the fountain's water was heard, now laughter and the sound of toys clattering against the stone floor rang out. Ethan was 1 year and 2 months old. He was already walking, well, running. He was a whirlwind of energy with dark curls and a smile that could disarm armies. Alexander sat on a stone bench reading the newspaper, or pretending to read it, because in reality he couldn't take his eyes off his grandson, who was chasing a golden retriever around the garden. The millionaire had changed. He had stopped dyeing his gray hair, wore more comfortable clothes, linen shirts with no tie, and continued running his empire with an iron fist. But now he did it from a remote office at the estate, dedicating his afternoons sacredly to his heir. Mia came out of the house bringing a tray of fresh lemonade. She was radiant. She had studied English literature and business during that year and was taking online courses in vineyard management. She was no longer the scared girl. She was a confident, beautiful woman who walked with the natural elegance of someone who knows she belongs. "Alexander, you have a call from Wall Street," she said, setting down the tray. "Let them wait," he grunted. "Ethan is about to catch the dog. This is more important." Mia laughed and sat down beside him. "He spoils you too much," she said, looking at her son. "It is my privilege as a grandfather. I'm raising him to be a leader. You're raising him to be human. It's a good balance." Suddenly, Alexander's face grew serious. He folded the newspaper and looked at Mia. "I have something for you." He pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from his pocket. It wasn't a check. It wasn't jewelry. Mia took it, puzzled. "What is this?" "Open it." Mia broke the wax seal, pulled out the legal documents, read the title, and brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with instant tears. Document of full adoption and recognition of parentage. It wasn't just about Ethan. "You read it wrong," Alexander said, his voice a bit husky. "Read the second paragraph." Mia looked down. By this act, Alexander Harrington legally adopts Mia Thompson as his legitimate daughter, granting her all inheritance rights, the surname, and most importantly, the legal and moral status of a full family member. Mia let go of the papers, which fell onto her lap, and she looked at Alexander through a curtain of tears. "Why?" she asked in a whisper. "You already gave me everything. You gave me a home, a future for my son. You didn't have to do this." Alexander took off his reading glasses and took her hands, his large, old hands wrapped around hers. "Because Robert chose you. And Robert was the only one of us who had the wisdom to see the truth." Alexander sighed, looking toward the horizon. "For years I thought my legacy was the money, the buildings, the family name. But when I saw you fight for Ethan in that hospital, when I saw you give your own life, I understood that legacy is loyalty. It is fierce love." He squeezed her hands. "You are the daughter I never had, Mia. Not because of a paper, but because you saved my family. You saved me from dying a bitter, lonely old man. I want you to carry my name. I want it so that when I'm gone, no one, absolutely no one, can question your place in this world. I want Ethan to grow up knowing his mother wasn't the maid, but the queen of this house." Mia couldn't hold it back anymore. She threw herself into Alexander's arms, hugging him with the strength of a daughter finding her father. Alexander, the man who didn't hug, closed his eyes and returned the embrace, resting his chin on her head. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. It was the first time she had called him that, and for Alexander, that word was worth more than all his bank accounts in Switzerland. "You're welcome, daughter." The moment was interrupted by a war cry. "Grandpa! Grandpa!" Ethan came running toward them with a crushed flower in his hand, a trophy from his conquest in the garden. He tripped in the last few feet and fell face first onto the grass. Mia made a move to get up, scared, but Alexander stopped her gently. "Wait," he said. "Let him be." Ethan stayed on the ground for a second, surprised. He looked at his mother, then his grandfather. He saw that no one was running to rescue him in panic. He saw that they were looking at him with confidence. The boy put his little hands on the ground, furrowed his brow with that expression identical to Robert's, and pushed himself up. He stood up, brushed off his dirt-stained knees, and smiled triumphantly, lifting the flower again. "Grandpa!" he shouted, running and handing the flower to Alexander. Alexander took the flower as if it were a diamond. "Thanks, champ." He sat the boy on his lap. Mia leaned on her adoptive father's shoulder, gazing at her son. "You know," Alexander said, looking up at the clear California sky, "Robert would be painting this right now. The light is perfect." "He's watching it," Mia assured him. "I'm sure of it." Alexander nodded. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something he'd carried with him ever since that day at the hospital, the Medal of St. Christopher. The silver was worn down from being touched so often. He placed it around Ethan's neck. The medal gleamed in the sunlight. "Now it's your turn to wear it, little one," he whispered in his ear. "And remember, lost causes are the only ones worth fighting for." Ethan laughed, not understanding the words but feeling the love. He grabbed the medal with his little hand and stared at it in fascination. Far away in New York, the mansion was boarded up. Victoria was a social outcast, living off the charity of distant relatives, and the rumors had died down. Here, in this corner of California, there were no rumors, only a family. A strange family, patched together with broken pieces, united by blood, pain, and forgiveness. An indestructible family. Alexander looked at Mia, then at Ethan, and finally closed his eyes, feeling the breeze on his face. For the first time in 40 years, he wasn't afraid of the future, because the future was right there laughing in his lap, and it had his son's eyes. "Shall we eat?" Alexander asked, being, "Aunt Catherine has ordered the barbecue, and you know if we're late, she'll disinherit us all." Mia laughed, a clean, happy laugh. "Let's go, Dad." 3 generations rose together. They walked toward the ranch house under the sun, leaving the long shadows of the past behind them. And as they crossed the threshold, a yellow butterfly, the same color as those rubber gloves that started it all, flew over their heads and disappeared into the blue of the sky, free at last. The end.